I'd like to welcome everybody to this space to have this conversation. We start by asking the Creator to guide our discussions, fill our minds and our hearts with good thoughts and energies as we speak on behalf of all our relations in the work around conservation and nature-based solutions here in Canada and abroad. My name is Steven Nitah. I am a senior advisor to the Indigenous Leadership Initiative and a leader, one of the membership of the Leadership Circle of the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, which is hosting this fireside chats. We are, the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership is an Indigenous-led initiative. We are a Canada-wide partnership of researchers, Indigenous leaders, and environmental organizations working together to transform conservation practice and support efforts to advance Indigenous-led conservation in the spirit of reconciliation and decolonization. Our partnership is rooted in the principle of ethical space and two-eyed seeing, and our work is guided by a leadership circle comprised of 4 Indigenous thought leaders and 2 non-Indigenous academics, and an elders lodge and various working groups. We are in our second year of a 7-year program hosted by the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, the Isaac Alam Foundation, and the University of Guelph. Welcome to the first multi-part webinar series on natural climate solutions. The series will share a foundational knowledge and stories about innovative natural climate solutions projects in Canada with a focus on Indigenous perspectives. Our goal is to increase capacity among Indigenous nations and their allies to lead and collaborate on natural climate solutions that benefit communities and the planet. We thank the Metcalfe Foundation for their support in creating this series. The first webinar has been created in a collaboration with the Anishinabe Business Professional Association. The ABPA was created in 2019 to advocate for inclusion of Indigenous business in pursuit of economic reconciliation in Canada. We are pleased to introduce our moderator today, Jason Rasevych, one of the co-founders of ABPA, who is an Ojibwe Cree from Angeconeb First Nation. Jason has experience working with various First Nations across Canada on capital projects, finance and legacy infrastructure, business expansion, and long-term strategy of organizations. Jason has deep knowledge of Indigenous rights and resource industry and has led numerous successful negotiations. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Steven, for the introduction and welcome everybody. It is great to be here today and a privilege to be moderating this event on behalf of the Anishinabe Business Professional Association and in partnership here. I'd like to first start off by acknowledging the traditional territory where I'm based today in Thunder Bay, Ontario, of the Anishinaabe people and the Robinson Superior Treaty 1850 and all of the other surrounding Indigenous peoples across Canada, of where we are from coast to coast attending this event virtually, all the people of Turtle Island, all the Indigenous and Inuit and Métis. We are all treaty people in certain jurisdictions where there are those treaty rights. With the Anishinaabe Business Professional Association, we launched in 2019 to bring topics like carbon and nature to the forefront and other items that in Northern Ontario that communities are looking into related to their economic development strategies, and very pleased to have this panel here today to be able to bring this discussion to the forefront. A few housekeeping items before we get started is you have all been muted by the tech host. Please keep your mic muted when you're not speaking. To unmute yourself, click on the microphone button at the bottom of the screen or hold down the space bar while you're speaking. There will be a Q&A at the end, and you're welcome to write questions into the chat and submit them. Feel free to record your questions in the chat box and we will get to as many of them as possible. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the CRP website in the coming days, and the recording will feature the speakers only. Now, getting into the content and the material, this first webinar in this series features a diversity of speakers from Indigenous organizations, the business community, and environmental organizations who are here to provide their perspective from the opportunities and challenges related to Indigenous-led natural climate solutions in Canada. After we hear from our speakers, there will be a Q&A session with our panelists. We welcome suggestions and input for future webinar in this series as well. The next webinar will follow and will focus on a case study of natural climate solutions in action and will feature the Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative, which was just celebrated its 20-year anniversary. Natural climate solutions such as conservation, restoration, and protection of carbon-rich ecosystems are an important tool to reduce global net greenhouse gas levels. Some research suggests that natural climate solutions could provide 30 to 40% of mitigation required by 2030 to ensure global warming is capped at under 2 degrees Celsius. Indigenous-led natural climate solutions weave together three pressing issues in Canada: climate change, biodiversity loss, and honoring the rights of Indigenous people. Numerous Indigenous nations have expressed an interest in creating natural climate solutions within their territories, yet numerous barriers might be overcome for this to happen. This space is highly complex and evolving very rapidly. There are key jurisdictional issues and other complexities that we hope to highlight today. For the first group of speakers, I'm going to introduce David Flood, who is the General Manager of Wahkohtowin Development GP. Over the past 15 years, David has operated in a variety of service, management, and advisory capacities. David's skills and experience range from operational forestry, business development, policy, land use planning, and governance. With Wahkohtowin, his main focus has been supporting business development and participation in the forest sector of Ontario on behalf of its owner First Nations, with the aim to advance reconciliation and grow awareness for Indigenous competency and knowledge systems. David is joined by Joseph Pallant, Director of Climate Innovations, Ecotrust Canada. Joseph has been a pioneer in shaping Canada's carbon market since 2004, building leading-edge offset projects, contributing to the development of strong standards and helping society understand the role of ecosystem-based projects in halting climate change. Joseph's work, insight, advocacy continue to shape the growth of Canada's low-carbon economy. Welcome, David and Joseph.
Thank you very much, Jason, Steve, and Mary Kate for pulling us in. Dishnakaz Zonze Mckinnon, Strong Wolf. My home community is Wahkohtowin First Nation. I am a registered professional forester here in Ontario. I did hold that designation in British Columbia when I was practicing out west. It's a real privilege here to speak to what looks like over 200 people on the call today. And I'd like to just share and impart some of the journey that we've experienced in what I call the Northeast Superior region of Ontario, the Chapleau Height of Land area, and give the story of the three communities that I serve who formed Wahkohtowin and have allowed me the privilege of taking my toolbox to work with them to create outcomes to meet their community desires and needs. The process of what the communities were looking for really started over a decade ago in and around 2007, 2008, when Ontario decided to initiate forest tenure reform. And the communities had spent some time sorting out what that would mean to them and what it would take to get them involved in that process. And in that geopolitical conversation came up with 22 principles and then allowed for the Martel and Magpie forests to become amalgamated and they would participate in that process. While they were doing that, and that's on or around when they decided to form Wahkohtowin, they felt that after that 3-4 year period, there was enough conversation going around what the expectations were for the purpose of amalgamating those forests to meet Indigenous needs. They started to embark on the notion that they needed to become also economic participants in the forest sector to raise their participation in forest management and being able to implement and steer or direct any future uses of the forest, such as forest carbon, such as bioeconomy, such as the Tree to Home initiative, which is really tied into a conservation economy commitment that the communities had made. And that's where the relationship was born with Ecotrust Canada back in around 2008 and 12. The presentations were made. And my journey recently has been seeing the completion of that amalgamation and having the communities sign on to the shareholder agreements. The communities have also negotiated resource revenue share agreements through a series of pilots leading to a 5-year pilot that has now seen roughly $850,000 per community come in the door through resource revenue sharing. And most recently, and I call it the trifecta because the issue around forest management planning and consultation, the meaningful involvement of First Nations in developing forest management plans and annual work schedules has been very challenged. So we actually have now come up with 2 agreements. Mind you, we had to take the provincial government to court, and it's happened at a really interesting time in Ontario where they're doing a revision to the environmental assessment regime. And they canceled the declaration order on timber class EA, or the MNR 75 declaration order. So we're threading the eye of a needle with this trifecta, because what it is allowing us to do is empower our communities, help build lands and resource departments, help staff up through the development of a guardian program. So focused on youth, elder, intergenerational knowledge transfer, and let those youth take up that space into this forward-looking implementation regime that we see ahead of ourselves for the next decade around conservation, around climate or natural climate solutions, around the bioeconomy, around circular economies to create stronger well-being in our northern environment, dealing with species at risk, climate action. Our youth are highly competent to come out of these post-secondary institutions and take up these spaces. And we're proud to create and allow that platform to take effect. Wahkohtowin has purchased a building in Chapleau to act as an innovation lab or a hub to generate the space to create the drumbeat and serve the Northeast region. We have the ability to touch up to 20 sister communities with this kind of extension work that we see happening. And I think just the last thing before I transition and let Joseph pick up on the project itself is that, you know, this is not an overnight story. This takes, you know, 5-10 year type decade level thinking about how to get this accomplished and done. And I'll tell you, after the last 5 years, I can only expect good things to come, because practicing as an Indigenous forester in 2003 feels a whole lot different today because of the national interest on reconciliation and the need for change and the need for involving Indigenous peoples and communities in this critical time that we're in for finding solutions across landscapes, the boreal and the world. So with that, I'll let Joseph pick up on the technical aspects of what we've done with the analysis and research, and his experience with we'll call them the mechanics of what our guardians will pick up and start to verify as we go forward. Thank you. And Joseph, over to you.
Thanks so much, David. And thank you, everybody, all the organizers, all of the attendees, for being here today. And it is very exciting to sort of feel the tide lifting on this work. And I know a lot of people feel a lot of responsibility, having been putting one foot in front of the other on all aspects of this work and its enabling processes over the last, you know, years and decades and centuries. And hopefully we can pull some of these pieces of the puzzle together, really enshrine these new tools and use them to get the types of outcomes for communities, for biodiversity, and for climate based on this urgent need to address climate change. So in the Northeast Superior project in the Anishinabe Forest, want to talk a bit about the vision and opportunity. So our vision is to reclaim Indigenous people's rightful place as land stewards and equal partners within Canada's constitutional framework, starting with the Chapleau Crown Game Preserve at sort of the core of this project and then spreading elsewhere. And our compelling opportunity is to guide forest management decisions and priorities on the Magpie Martel Enhanced Sustainable Forest Management License, the ESFL, in partnership with Rayonier, the logging tenure holder, with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and with the communities to move this forward based on carbon finance and carbon value. So there's a bunch of different pieces of the puzzle, but would love to tell you a little bit about the scenarios for climate benefit that we see on this landscape where we can change forest management, have carbon benefit that we then try to bring to ground and bring to market through carbon offsets or a couple of other potential supporting pathways that enable this work. And then we also really want to explore the overlap between climate benefit and other community values. So a core part of the carbon offset project development process is really looking at what's the baseline, what is going to happen on our landscape, on this landscape, if we just hands off and just let it keep going status quo. And then we do another set of scenarios around if we go in and change management, if we go and take an action, what are the outcomes going to be created from that? And we both frame that up in terms of, well, what do we have to go do on the landscape? And then also, what's that going to look like in terms of tons of carbon dioxide benefit and our whole process for quantifying and verifying and then issuing offsets on the basis of that. So with in the Anishinabe Forest, there was really a scenario one run. So in our case, we've done forest modeling and with our forest modeling partners to look at the forestry reality and then a climate model based on the Canadian government's CBM CFS3 model to look at what's the carbon impact of those forestry changes. Scenario one really is a model run to establish what would happen on this landscape with no humans involved. And so no active management baseline. Of course, this isn't really the baseline because there are humans involved. So we had a second scenario looking at running the long-term management direction, which is largely set by the forestry company and the Crown, though the communities also have input into that. And so that is really, how is this forest going to be managed? Right now, we're in the middle, you know, the Crown and the logging company and us are in the middle of that process, really saying, what's the next decade going to look like on that forest? And that really creates the baseline. If we do nothing else, that's going to happen. So then we go into modeling what would we like to see on the landscape, engaging with the community on what are the priorities that they would like to see manifested in their traditional territories, and then how does that frame out to carbon? And so we did a scenario 3 where we look at where we model the carbon impact of the high impact management decisions, the things that we've picked out as likely and that the modeling has been able to surface as likely activities that are going to have a large carbon impact. And then we really explore the potential changes in forest management and engage the community on overlap of that climate benefit and the community priorities. We had two main climate actions, forest management actions that really drive the majority of the carbon benefit that we feel we can achieve on this landscape. And kind of briefly, one of them is simply extending the rotation age of the forest that's going to be harvested closer to the time when the trees are their biggest. So right now, a lot of times logging decisions will be made that, well, the trees are, you know, half, 2/3, 3/4 of the way to their biggest size. We're going to cut that now. It moves our timing up. We have better financials out of that, and so that happens. But what we see is there's a relatively in the scheme of things, low impact to the forestry reality, opportunity to just lengthen that rotation age. And so if we can, for example, keep the trees on the landscape 15 years farther, they get that much bigger. And then even when they are cut, they have more valuable wood. And it's kind of hard without a whiteboard, but the carbon benefit really comes in, even if those trees are getting cut 15 years from now. If we change the management of all of the forests on the landscape, where all of the trees will always be managed till they're 15 years older, we create this sort of durable increase in carbon benefit. The other pathway that we're looking at is simply putting a line on the map around certain areas that will just be conserved. So areas that we're going to be conserved for a while and then cut, or other areas that we're just going to be cut. We go in and look at what's important for the communities, what's important for the ecosystems. Are there areas that really should just be protected? And we model that in and are trying to use the carbon benefit to create that outcome. There is a really interesting piece of the puzzle where we've sort of talked about, these are the two big hits for carbon benefit, but there are all sorts of other things that we want to achieve on this landscape and that are important for the priorities of these communities. And so the way I like to explain it is we're trying to bring in the revenue and the capability based on that increasing rotation age and protecting forests, and then we can spend some of that money on other things that are important to the communities that may have lower carbon benefit, but that are still, in the scheme of things, deeply important and critical outcomes from the whole scope of the project. We're here, I think, largely today to talk about carbon offsets, and that's definitely been my history in the space. And it is quite fascinating to see with a project like this, and I weren't probably with the other projects on the call today, that there's really sort of a swath of opportunity for how do we finance these projects. One of them is really so carbon offset development, which we've talked a little bit about. I also think that there's project-based granting opportunities. So we've been very fortunate to be supported by philanthropic space, by the environmental community, to be able to spend the time to do this extra diligence on these projects and to do a lot of this pre-work to enable and assess feasibility. And I do think that right now that is an important component for making these projects happen and driving them forward. And I really see that as that primes the pump, that kickstarts, that helps us bring capacity, work with community to raise capacity there to make folks more able to engage and be a part of this process. But it's not the end point. We still need new financial tools to be able to bring this all to ground. So project-based offsets have been a key focus of our project. And then we also are looking to other tools that are really percolating they're being created out of society via the government's recognition that natural climate solutions are a critical, unmissable opportunity for Canada to create the types of outcomes that we want to have. And I know that in webinar 3, we're going to get to talk a bit more about that work. I should wrap it up soon, very soon. I did just want to say a little bit about offsets, and I know that folks are going to cover that more. So offsets are a tool that value the climate benefit of keeping carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stored in trees, plants, and soils of the ground. This tool can allow communities to achieve their forest and management goals, where these goals line up with the climate goals. And our job is really to surface, to understand what the community wants to see on the landscape, and through this set of tools, explore whether and how we can achieve that through developing a carbon offset project and making that happen. So I'll leave some of the fun geekery about how to make an offset for other folks in the space, but it's an exciting moment right now. The federal government is developing new forest offset protocols, which will be part of a federal offset system. The voluntary market seems to have picked up again as people recognize the value of these projects. And it's just really exciting to be in the space, working with David, working with Wahkohtowin, the communities on the ground, and then all of you on this call in the broader space to make this kind of work happen. So we appreciate that opportunity. And I think to everybody, just keep up the great work and the pressure. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph and David, for the overview of the collaboration and the project that's happening in that area. And spoke a little bit about, the regulatory market, the voluntary market, adaptations to the FMP process and discussions with, the consuming mill in the area. We'll get more into the Q&A at that point in time. And if anybody has any other questions, I see a few that are popping up there. Feel free to respond to some of them in the chat, but we will try to include some of that in the discussion. For the next presentation, I'd like to introduce Chris Angeconeb, President and CEO of AurCrest Gold, Lac Seul First Nation, about an emerging project in his community's traditional territory. Chris is a member of Lac Seul First Nation and is also President and CEO of AurCrest Gold. Chris possesses a strong understanding of the interrelated issues facing many First Nations, of the requirements of the many agencies involved in Aboriginal affairs, and of the practical implementation of the Crown's duty to consult and accommodate. Joining Chris is Jamie MacKinnon, who is VP of Bluesource, where he leads the carbon offset and renewable fuel project origination and development in Canada. Jamie brings a strong track record as a catalyst of significant project investments into natural climate solutions. He has worked in the carbon market since 2002 and has deep technical, financial, policy, and strategic skill set in the area. We're also going to be joined by Colin Schweinemash, who is the general manager of the Agoke Development Corporation, where he's responsible for the implementation of the forestry agreement with the Crown for the management responsibility of the Agoke Forest in northwestern Ontario. Colin works with a team of technicians to develop annual plans for harvesting, silviculture, prescriptions, forestry road, and network construction and maintenance, while protecting culturally sensitive areas and animal habitats. Colin is a member of Yamatung First Nation, and he will be joining the discussion. So we'll hand that off to Chris to begin.
Oh, bonjour. Yes, thank you, Jason. My name's Chris Angeconeb. I'm actually here in my home territory, Visual at Sulako in northwestern Ontario. So I'm just about 30 kilometers from my own reserve. And I guess much like our previous presenters, specifically with David Flood, I'll give you a little bit of a background of how I came to be where I am right now. I was born and raised in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, as a result of my father attending residential school down there. In my early 20s, kind of moved back to his home in Sioux Lookout, started working in engineering across northwestern Ontario. A few years passed by, a few experiences come along, and my own First Nation kind of poached me from a social justice organization that I was working for, a local Native women's group. And I got dropped into the role of the flood claim coordinator. So it was my role as a band member to relate to all of the past chiefs that had ever been associated with seeking restitution from the federal government regarding the illegal flooding of our reserve. That was in the mid-2000s, and at the same time in the mid-2000s, Ontario really started having to adhere to the concepts of consultation and accommodation. And part of my role for Lac Seul at that point in time was the Lands and Resources Coordinator. So I was the point person for any Ontario ministry to come in and engage under the burgeoning consultation and accommodation requirements, to come in and engage with Lac Seul as a council with respect to our treaty and our inherent rights. Over a number of years, we determined amongst ourselves, amongst the Lac Seul band membership, how we wanted to be consulted and accommodated by our own chief and council. Because imposition of the Indian Act is how our chief and council currently are elected. So we structured a consultation process for our own band membership. Now, because, as I said, the reserve was flooded, a lot of our membership, 3,800 of us reside off reserve. Most of us in the area, but in all the communities around the Lac Seul Reservoir. We used that consultation mechanism for dealing with the Ontario government and MNR and then MNRF on forestry management. I was also forced to kind of sit on the LCC committees for the local forest planning committees. And with respect to mineral development and exploration, I know Red Lake is a significant gold camp and has a lot of mineral development and exploration. That became my role. I was one of the negotiators that completed the collaboration agreement with Goldcorp between the Lac Seul Band and Goldcorp as a company operating out of Red Lake. So all of these things kind of came up out of working with my own band. And because of consultation and accommodation, we did have a variety of junior exploration companies and mid-tier producers engaging us on different ways based on what they thought the understanding of consultation and accommodation was. One of them happened to come out of the woodwork early, realized that there was certain writing on the wall regarding treaty rights, largely treaty rights. And that was a company called Tribute Minerals. Lac Seul eventually invested its own money into Tribute Minerals as a public company and appointed me to the board, which was unexpected, but okay. Since following the board appointment, I became the general manager for economic development for Lac Seul, responsible for a lot of the boards and corporations that were established that arose from the various settlements of historic grievances that we'd had, companies, joint venture and otherwise, that we structured to participate in the mining and forest industries. And when I actually left employment with Lac Seul, I became the vice president of AurCrest Gold. And after a few years as the vice president, I took over the reins as the president, CEO, and director of AurCrest Gold, which is a junior exploration company listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, Venture Exchange, let's correct that. So over the course of all of this, the aspects of forest industries that affected my life and my daily conduct, or daily business conduct, was kind of tied to the collapse of the mills in the downturn of the forestry industry. The mills collapsed. A lot of them went bankrupt. The one that was responsible for operating the Lac Seul forest was one of them. And the Lac Seul First Nation wound up picking up the forest management license in a limited way. A 1-year license renewed every year. And we ran it through a company called the Agoke Resources Corporation. So that took over all operations, silviculture, planning, et cetera, that goes along with standard forest management. And eventually we succeeded in getting our SFL. Now, that has since been changed over to the 20-year ESFL, and the corporation that's now in control of that ESFL is named Untitled. So when we took it over at Lac Seul, working through Agoke Resources, what our goals were to bring our own community's lines of thinking more into, bring the operation of the forest more into the lines of thinking of more people. That's probably the best way to state it. And we actively carried on as such. At the same time, we were approaching mineral development, all resource industries, whether it was hydroelectric in terms of power, mining and exploration, forestry. We wanted to be in the business end of all of that. And in essence, that's the 90-second call to action under the TRC. My role in AurCrest is largely founded in how I came up through all of these experiences with Lac Seul. Rather than a consultation and accommodation standpoint, AurCrest tries approaching it as a partnership and inclusion, because one of the things that I've always personally held is that there's been 100+ year wall that has kept Indigenous communities, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, or otherwise, out of the Canadian economy. And as a result, peoples across the country all suffer from a variety of, I guess, their health concerns, a variety of health concerns when you're talking about the overall status of a person's well-being, that arrive from being kept out of the regular economic model of Western society in Canada. So the approach that we have always taken is, let's include our local First Nations partners as much as we're able. Now, in working with some of the communities that are around my mining claims, and mine, I mean, AurCrest, around the mining claims that we have in Northwestern Ontario, there are a number of First Nations that are in forest management planned areas and areas that are undergoing community land use planning. So since we try and keep everybody, we like to say, keep it equitable for everybody, we bring a lot of the First Nations in to talk about the business opportunities that they've got, the ownership opportunities they've got, and where I'm able, I offer any advice that I am capable of giving on what inherent rights should look like. So I try essentially to get everybody thinking about a generation from now. Nobody's any different, but at the moment, there is a significant disconnect between the participation of First Nations and the participation of Bay Street in industries such as mine. So where we have opportunities to expand the roles of First Nations, ownership roles or operative roles especially, we like to try and put as much effort into those as possible. So because a lot of the local efforts recently have been around forest management, taking over the tenures, operating the companies, and doing so in difficult market conditions, I guess, you have a balance of how, and let me give me a second to think about this, how to balance all of the needs, whether it's Bay Street, First Nations, local workers, and then layer on top of that the planet at large. So over the last, after the last decade or so, a lot of it has turned into conservation efforts that have been supported to various degrees in Canada by offsetting programs. Now, we started a project with my own chief, just having coffee, here's an idea, let's flesh it out. And over a bunch of coffees, we fleshed it out a little bit. Just about to turn it over to Jamie, so Jamie, get yourself ready. What it wound up being was, because ORC, the Wahkohtowin Resources Corporation, was a principal player in the operations of the Lac Seul Forest Management Unit, what we had identified was there was the opportunity to get away from the Crown Forest Sustainability Act and operate it more in lines with what our community had always wanted to see as far as forest operations. That led one step to the next, to an introduction to Bluesource, and we brought in Jamie to speak to the chief and council and a few of the senior staff regarding the opportunities as we had identified. Initially, the target was the actual whole Lac Seul Forest Management Unit. Because of the complexities right now with the federal versus the provincial fight regarding these things, and the lack of actual protocols, the chief and council have decided that while we work on doing this on a larger scale across our traditional territory, we will focus on the lands that we have primacy on, which was the Lac Seul Reserve. So the comparison between the two projects is 800,000 hectares, including a few other First Nations, or 26,000 hectares, that is the reserve lands. So that's quick and dirty. Feel free to ask questions later, but I'll turn it over to Jamie now.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And I want to thank, just before the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, and I want to thank everybody on the line for for their attention. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss a topic that's very close to heart for me. So just very briefly, Bluesource has been in business for 20 years, really developing carbon offsets. We develop, market, and monetize carbon offsets on behalf of communities and clients. And we have over 55 successful forest carbon projects that we have developed and are under develop. That's represented well over $180 million that have gone to communities, landowners, tribal nations in the US. And so we're actively doing this and have a tremendous capacity in not only forest carbon, but other natural climate solutions like grasslands conservation, which we've done several successful projects. And we're very, very excited about the opportunity that has existed for quite some time in the United States because they've had the protocols and the markets. And it is very much coming to Canada in full force. There were certainly leaders, and Joseph was certainly one of them early on in BC. And with the Great Bear project sort of paves part of the way. But we're seeing this emerging opportunity come to Canada, and Bluesource is an organization of people who really care about nature and want to preserve it. And I think the opportunity we see in Canada, we're also very excited to contribute what we can to Indigenous peoples, really showing and demonstrating to Canada and Canadians the leadership on climate action as a result of land stewardship practices. And so we're looking to very much lend the experience we have and the capital that we have to that exercise of Indigenous leadership on climate action. And that's very much the spirit in which we've engaged with Lac Seul First Nation and engaged with Chris and everybody at AurCrest to bring this market opportunity, leverage this environmental market opportunity to create better outcomes. And if I were to describe the opportunity in one way, I would describe it as follows, and this is why I think it's why the offset, the forest carbon offset opportunity, and is so exciting, because for so long, communities have really had one financial benefit associated with the forest resource, and that is timber. Of course, there are many other benefits, but they're intangible and not financial up until now. And forest carbon is about creating a financial benefit associated with the conservation of the forest or the sustainable management of the forest, so that it can directly compete and in many ways have synergies with the timber revenues. And that's what I find exciting about this opportunity, and we're really looking to bring to the forefront. For Lac Seul, particularly related to their reserve, and there's a very different dynamic for projects on reserve or treaty land entitlement lands or Indigenous protected conservation areas, where there is very much a control over the forest management practices and an absence of provincial regulations that exist on Crown managed forest. We see a lot of different instances. Lac Seul and others who we work with, like the Wahkohtowin First Nation or Métis settlements in Alberta, they have an active opportunity to contract for timber harvesting on their property, and they will go and do that to generate own source revenues to support the community. in a lot of these markets, for where that timber is used for pulpwood, forest products companies are paying $4, $5 a cubic meter for that fiber. A forest carbon project allows those communities to make more optimal decisions and actually be rewarded for meeting a much higher standard of sustainable forest management that's aligned with their traditional values. And the forest carbon benefit associated with the pricing that we see in today's compliance market can be 2, 3, 4 times what is paid for the $4 to $5 per cubic meter in pulpwood. And so it very much competes. It very much allows communities to now forego, to say, no, I do not want to contract out for somebody to liquidate all the merchantable timber off of my reserve. I can make decisions about a more limited harvest that retains jobs related to the logging industry, but also obtain significant revenues through sustainable forest management, conservation that preserves a lot of the other values related to hunting, trapping, and other cultural values. And that's what we're talking about really for Lac Seul on their reserve. And I think the exciting opportunity for many First Nations, and these reserve opportunities are slightly easier and on shorter timeframes or potential timeframes than the much larger opportunities and quite frankly, the larger prize, which is forest carbon and leveraging these markets for moving the needle on how forestry on traditional territory is managed. On that side, the forest carbon can really incentivize actions that are additional and go beyond and above regulated practices in the industry. Joseph mentioned extension of rotation ages as one principal one, and that's something that definitely comes into play for the Lac Seul on their larger enhanced sustainable forest license. There are other measures as well. There are potentially reducing the size of clear cuts, engaging in a less intensive clear cutting regime over a larger area. And combining it with measures related to reduced impact logging, combining it with measures that enhance the resiliency of the forest to pests and forest fires. And so there's a number of ways in which forests can be, the ecosystems can be enhanced to create greater greenhouse gas sequestration that can generate value in these markets. And so it is we're really coming in on the end of helping communities assess these opportunities. We do so together with AurCrest and in the case of Lac Seul at no cost. We align our interests with those of the communities and really just participating in the potential revenues. And then in most cases, these projects involve very significant costs related to forest inventories, verification. And so we have the capital resources to fund all of those costs internally and do so for this. And we're very conscious as well, and I'll probably finish on this point of, there are quite a few that those costs are because these are resource intensive activities. And we're very conscious that these projects need to lead to job opportunities, training opportunities for local members of the communities we work for. And so we are always conscious of that. We have developed a training program that's fully funded for the members of Indigenous communities we're working with to get trained on forest carbon inventories and timber cruising, so that all that work can be done by local community members, and this can create sustainable jobs for environmental stewardship to manage these projects. And so we're always looking for ways to optimize and maximize the local benefits of these projects. So happy to also answer any questions. I'll probably stop there and pass it over to Colin.
Okay, thanks there, Jamie, Chris, Joseph, and who's the first speaker there? David. Okay, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Colin Schweinemash. I'm from Yamatun First Nation, also known as Fort Hope. We're located in Ontario, Northern Ontario, north of Thunder Bay. I am the GM for Agoke Development Corporation, and fairly new to the position, but I mean, if you knew a lot about me, you would know that if there's an opportunity, I'll take up that challenge. And working alongside Jason for the past year and a half directly, much of the work already was paved and is being paved, and carrying on what Agoke has developed within our forestry area is very unique. Yeah, I mean, like it's Agoke does have a joint venture partnership with one of our sawmills within the area. Our fiber does have a home, and speaking on behalf of this nature-based solution, in my observations, being a part of the forestry industry, there is a need for utilization of fiber, whatever things that are left behind, and or this carbon offset discussion. We are stewards of the land. I actually do come from, I guess, our traditional territory, and our forestry area is approximately 10,000, 11,000 square kilometers in size. So a lot of the discussion, already has been said. Like we do practice the same issues and best practices, sacred sites, like traditional valued areas. We engage community, we engage trappers, it's something, a message that needs to be, I guess, identified, especially with anybody that is moving forward in such a project or within their respective traditional territories, is consultation. Most importantly, like my elders told me, the best place to start is at the grassroots. And what they meant by that was 1,000 cups of tea. You'll hear their voice, you'll hear their needs, their wants, and what their beliefs are. Like I'm here, I represent 3 First Nations, but yet I'm not the one that's going to be signing on or approving something. But just keep that in mind as we move forward here. And yeah, I mean, like I think Jason has brought this Agoke Development Corporation to like a good place and time. We're, I guess, second to most with Lac Seul there, Ontario Forest License Manager. So it's there's a lot of moving parts. Like we're speaking on behalf of carbon offsets and all that. I value the same thing. Tree planting, reforestation, silviculture. We do it all. Working with different partners at the sawmill or foresters. Um, like again, sometimes I wonder how Jason did this on his own at the time. And like there's so much to do. There's so much to look forward to, and yeah, like I think I don't really want to say too much that already Arthur or David and Joseph already said. And same thing with Chris. I mean, my First Nation has had many opportunities. They still continue to have people knocking at their door. For those that don't know who Fort Hope or Yamatun First Nation is, um, I could just say Ring of Fire, Northern Ontario. Like it's to me, it's a hub of training, whether it's forestry, mining. Like there's a lot of different partners that are knocking at our doors, and but yet just seeing what is best for our forests. And that's basically where we're at right now. And but yeah, I think I don't want to say too much other than that. I hope to, if you have any other questions, or like, just feel free to ask, and I'll be here. I'm honored to be invited to this. So, miigwech, yeah, for now.
Thank you. Yes, it's inspiring to see, First Nations here in Ontario take forced tenure and then bring that back to the community level and think about all the other opportunities that are coming. And when we see, the carbon tax, when we see climate change, and when our Indigenous communities are in a position to do something about it, it's a very empowering uh, process, and something that is being explored both with Chris and Lac Seul and with Colin, with Agoke, with Aralan, Yamatung, and Martin Falls, three First Nations that work with Agoke there. Moving on to the next presentation, the last to sum it up, we will hear from Steven Nitah, Indigenous Leadership Initiative, CRP Leadership Circle, and Jenny Brown from Nature United, who will make the connection between the IPCAs and carbon offsets as an approach to Canada's reconciliation, meeting global climate commitments, and achieving economic recovery initiatives. Steven Nitah was raised by his great grandparents on the land around Lutza in the Northwest Territories. Stephen was a core member of the Indigenous Circle of Experts for the Pathway to Canada Target 1, is a senior advisor to the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, and is a member of the CRP Leadership Circle. He was elected chief of his community in 2008. He brought his community to the table with the Government of Canada on April 10 of 2010, signed a formal agreement to start negotiations around the protected area in the Taidin Nene. Stephen remains involved in the Taidin Nene, working as a negotiator for the First Nations and engaging with various levels of government to build in industry to build and support validation of their First Nation vision. Stephen is joined by Jenny Brown, who is the Director of Conservation for Nature United, where she leads the conservation team in three key regions: Great Bear Rainforest, Northwest Territories, and the Boreal Forests. Welcome.
Thank you for that, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. Steven Nitah Sulyada, I'm calling from the Yellowknife, the territory of the Quechua people, the traditional lands of the Yellowknife Dene and the Dragis territory. As Jason said, I was a member of the expert of Indigenous Circle of Experts that produced a report, We Rise Together, where we engage Indigenous peoples right across the country in 4 regional gatherings and a couple of national gatherings, asking them what type of relationship they would like to have with Canada for them to assist Canada in reaching its international commitments under the Aichi Accord as protecting 17%. As we know, the report was widely accepted. The report was completed in 2018. I was a member of that circle of experts as a representative of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative to support the implementation of that report and its recommendations. And I would say that all of its recommendations are completely implementable. The Indigenous Circle of Experts consisted of about 20 people, 11 Indigenous experts from across the country, with representation from the federal, some provincial and territorial governments who are in the conservation field. All the recommendations that came out of that work were completely discussed, negotiated even, and passed the sniff test of the bureaucracies of Canada. So they should be all implementable. The CRP, the Conservation Through Reconciliation, is a 7-year SSHRC-sponsored research project to support Indigenous leadership and initiatives in conservation, to support their leadership. The Indigenous Circle of Experts listened to our peoples from across the country, and they told us what kind of relationships they want to see and have with Canada and their provinces. And that is to respect their territories, their treaties, and the relationships that we have with our territories. So the Indigenous Leadership Initiative as a national organization as well, we have great leaders right across the country. We're there to support nationhood rebuilding, to support Indigenous nations to assume their responsibilities to their territories, their communities, and to their families. It's about decolonizing, and it's about lifting them up and supporting them in achieving their responsibilities to their territories. So that's the organizations that are working in support of Indigenous nations right across the country. Canada's Challenge Fund, for an example, is supporting 26 or so Indigenous nations who are pursuing Indigenous protected or conserved areas. We are supporting most of those Indigenous nations, right? One form or another. So there's a lot of activities in this country, and there's a lot of interest from Indigenous nations in pursuing Indigenous protected or conserved areas within their territories. Canada has committed to protecting 30% by 2030, hand in hand with Indigenous nations. Those are the words of Prime Minister Trudeau to the One Earth Summit just a few weeks ago. For Canada to achieve 30%, they have to double the protected areas they have in this country. We're about 15% now. So to get to 30% by 2030, they have to protect a quantum of land the size of roughly Ontario. So that's a big, big task, and Canada cannot achieve it without Indigenous leadership and Indigenous territories being part of those numbers. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, but that work provides a lot of opportunity. If we take it up to 30,000 feet level, for example, the reason why Canada and other nations around the world are saying we need to protect 30% is because we are losing biodiversity at an extremely high rate. We only have about 25% biodiversity left on Earth. The reality of it is if we start losing any more, the imbalance is just going to contribute to the changing climate. Instead of being a factor in protecting us from climate change, it will contribute to it. So the fact that 80% of the remaining biodiversity that's left on Earth is on Indigenous peoples' lands or lands that are influenced or managed by Indigenous peoples says a lot. It's about how we view our relationship with our territories. We understand the balance that's required on Earth. We use a circle to describe our relationships within the family units and with Mother Earth. We know that everything has to be equal or has to have balance. So I think that's the reason why the world is starting to recognize that the Indigenous peoples globally need to be leaders in the work of protecting biodiversity, ensuring that the nature that provides services continue to do so. It's not about creating new leadership. It's about enshrining the leadership that's there now. How do we support Indigenous nations to continue to have a positive relationship within their territories so that those territories can provide the nature-based solutions that we all need to survive on Earth and to combat climate? In Canada, the boreal forest is one of the areas of the world that is recognized as one of the lungs of the Earth. And if you use nature-based solutions and carbon offsets and creating financing opportunities, we can create economic basis and economic self-sufficiency through this and achieve reconciliation while we work with nature to maintain the climate solutions that they provide and create economic opportunities in areas of the country that is very difficult to create right now. To date, in the northern part of the country, north of the let's say the 55th parallel. It's either logging, mining, oil and gas, or some form of destruction of nature as the only economic opportunities. But with carbon offsets and positive relationships between Crown and Indigenous governments, where policies support the work of Indigenous peoples in managing their territories for the benefit of all, I think we can achieve reconciliation, we can achieve creating economic sustainability, recover from the this pandemic as part of the economic recovery plan as this pandemic, and open up the marketplace globally so that we can engage the global corporate interests in carbon offsets opportunities. I'm working on 2 projects, for an example, in the boreal forests. Both projects are roughly, if you combine them, will be around 60,000 square kilometers. Both projects combined would have over 60 million metric tons of carbon sink capacity. So the opportunity for carbon offsets is great. The capacity of Canada and corporate Canada is not enough. So I think we need to open it up to the global marketplace. And you know, as Indigenous nations, we are just getting into the economic relationships with Canada through relationships with industry. We are just getting into the mining industry. We're getting good deals with some of us. We become owners of these projects. And like the world is asking Canada, Canada is asking Indigenous nations, let's not go there. Let's protect your land so that, because it benefits us in Canada and the world. If Indigenous nations are to sacrifice their economic participation in this country by locking up their lands from development, then there should be a policy that Canada has and provinces has that would support other economic revenue opportunities from these protected lands. The revenues can be great, and just like the reason why I suggest that we open up the carbon market in Canada globally is because when Canada makes a commitment to protect 17% like they did through the Aichi Accord, and places, European countries, they're all agreeing to the same thing. What Canada has to protect when it comes to the 17% are the same sizes of European countries. So the sacrifices that Canada has to make far outweighs the sacrifices of other nations. And therefore, I say that other nations should help pay for these carbon management, biodiversity management, and the tax base and the taxpayers of this country should not be burdened with that. So that's from 30,000 feet level. I'd ask, there's been some great examples already given on local projects and opportunities. I'd like Jenny to also dive down into the lower than 30,000 feet level and describe a couple of areas, a few areas in Canada and possibly other places in the world that have successfully participated in the carbon offsets relationships they have. Jenny.
Thanks, Stephen. First, I'm really happy to be here, so I'd really like to thank the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership for inviting us to be part of this. And I come to you today from the lands of the Metkal and Okanagan Nation, which is right on what is now the border of Canada and the United States, in kind of what is now north central Washington. Really happy to be here because this conversation really aligns with a big part of the work that Nature United has been doing in Canada for the last decade plus few years, which has really been around trying to find ways that we as a conservation organization can support Indigenous leadership in natural resource management and making decisions about how lands are managed in Canada. And I'm also really pleased to be here with Steven. We've been able to have the opportunity to work together over the last like 7 or 8 years around Wahkohtowin. So it's really nice to be here talking about something else. Although Wahkohtowin is a really good example of what we're talking about. So just on that note, I'm going to go down to about 20,000 feet, and then I'll go to Great Bear and some other projects that are sort of demonstrations of what can happen and what has happened in Canada and has happened elsewhere. I think a couple points that I wanted to make are that Indigenous people, sort of in the same way Canada is being asked globally to do more than some other countries, because there's quite a bit of opportunity in Canada around tackling climate change. And I think the opportunity in Canada exists mostly in Indigenous territories, right, to use nature to tackle climate. And so that really does mean, as Jamie and Chris and Colin, Chris and Colin have said, that Indigenous people need to be able to find ways to benefit from that so that there's equity in how these solutions are resolved. And I think that even if a community, Indigenous communities' priorities are not really around climate at this point in time, but around other issues like health or housing or other things, there's lots of opportunity to connect using nature, managing land differently for climate outcomes to delivering on those other outcomes that Indigenous people might care about in their communities. I guess one thing I wanted to also say is, as Nature United, we've been super fortunate and are leading, working with a group of like 16 organizations to do a study that really is allowing us all to start to see the actual quantification of the benefit of nature and how, if you keep carbon in the ground and in plants and out of the air, how that can actually benefit climate. And obviously that has to be done in conjunction with reducing fossil fuel emissions and things along those lines. But that study will come out in the next couple months. And the thing that it is making really clear is that in Canada, there's huge opportunities that for changing or just even continuing doing what we're doing in terms of land management to keep carbon in the ground or put carbon in the ground. And it really happens in 3 ways, some of which you've heard about today. One is by protecting land. So not just forests, but peatlands, grasslands, several different kinds of ecosystems have a very high potential for storing carbon in the ground. And if they're protected, then that has climate benefits. Also managing the land, as others have talked about, where we're managing the forest differently in order to ensure that carbon is kept in the plants and in the ground longer. That happens not just in forests, but also in agricultural lands, as we think about soil health and keeping carbon in the soil on lands that are being used for agriculture. And then finally, restoring land. So in communities where things may be different than they are, let's say in the north, where there's great opportunities for protecting, there may be really big opportunities for restoring ecosystems such as forests and wetlands and getting benefit for communities that way. So I just wanted to highlight those things because I think they're really important. There's a wide breadth of opportunity, I think, for Indigenous governments and communities to think about how taking action that probably you want to take anyways can contribute to climate and can also benefit your communities. A couple examples of that, I was going to just touch really lightly on Great Bear because I think Mary Kate is organizing the next one of these virtual fireside chats to focus on Great Bear a little bit more. But I think it's a really good example of where Indigenous governments and provincial governments were able to come together and really advance reconciliation, also advance the stewardship and kind of protection and management of cultural and ecological values that both the nations and the provincial government cared about, and advance kind of a resilient economy in places that are challenging to do. They're remote communities, and so that's really important both to the nations and to the provincial government as well. And so out of that agreement, which really was a government-to-government agreement and created a suite of protected areas that protect cultural values and allow for traditional use, as well as protecting ecological values. And an agreement that changed the way forests are managed so that it's more sustainable over time. The First Nations in that area have been able to advance a carbon offset project, and they are able to actually generate revenue from that. It's a complicated thing. It took a long time because they had to negotiate the revenue sharing agreement with the province, how much of the revenue that comes in goes to the nations versus the province. So that was negotiated. And now they're in a position where they're finding buyers, as people have been talking about, both buyers who have to be carbon, take carbon out of the air and pay for that, and people that actually buyers or corporations that just want to do that because of their goals around sustainability. So companies that are trying to offset or mitigate for the travel that their employees do or the energy that they burn in order to just continue with their operations as a business. I think that there's a lot of, I'm going to leave the details of that to Paul Correa and the nations that actually are doing that work so that you guys can hear from them directly. But I think it's a really, it's a very promising example. It's the largest example of Indigenous-led offset carbon projects in Canada, I think. There are other examples in the United States with the Yurok tribe in California, where they have also been able to take land that is on their reservation and being able to protect that and then sell that carbon within the sort of regulatory system that exists in California to generate revenue. And from that, they've been able to increase the land that they actually own in fee simple title and been able to therefore change how the voice that they have in managing that land. So really been able to really change the dynamics of who's making the decisions in that part of California as well. So I think those are two really good examples, and I think Mary Kate is hoping to have some of the people involved in that actually come and talk to you all about the successes and the challenges of that. And I think that's the last thing that I wanted to say is that I think sometimes this opportunity to be part of tackling climate change and receiving or being able to advance other benefits or other things that people are looking for, and including revenue, can start to feel a little bit like the silver bullet and the thing that would solve all problems. And we're on the very front end of this journey, and a lot of the people that you're hearing from today are the early adopters, the people who are paving the way for how this is going to be able to happen in Canada and how other people are going to be able to hopefully walk down that road much more easily. But we're on the very front end of it, and so I think there's a lot of work, but a lot of opportunity and need, quite frankly, for Indigenous communities to be directly involved in ensuring that the way that that road is developed and how its path actually is done in a way that asserts Indigenous rights and advances reconciliation. So I'll probably leave it at that. Stephen, I'll send it back to you in case you have something else you wish to add to it or anything you need to fix in what I said. So. You're on mute, Stephen.
Thank you for that, Jenny. I appreciate you providing specific examples. There are pockets of examples globally of how this is working. In Canada, I think there's a real opportunity to collectively work together with Crown governments to make sure that the policies and regulations support Indigenous nations to benefit from their territories that are so instrumental in keeping the balance of life on Earth. I know there's many in this country and the world that don't believe carbon offsets is a right approach, that it's a false flag. I would, fundamentally, I agree with that. If that was the approach that's going to be going forward forever. But in Canada, as our Prime Minister said, we have to go through a transitional period to get off carbon and other fossil energies. I think we could align the creation of IPCs in relationship with industries that are getting off carbon, that have committed to getting away from carbon, and using trust funds to create an economic base in all of our smaller remote communities that can sustain their responsibilities, the cost of their responsibilities in managing their territories, vis-a-vis guardians, management, et cetera, et cetera. the work we've done in my community and the creation of Saugeen and Nina Indigenous protected and conserved areas. We did it in partnership with 2 Crown governments, and we used private-public funding to create the Saugeen and Nina Trust Fund that allows my people to be equal partners with Canada in our relationship with Parks Canada, which covers about 60% of Saugeen and Nina, about 14,000 square kilometers. That trust fund is owned by my nation, and it will be run in perpetuity. And we will use that to pay for all of our equipment, training, staff required to do our part in managing Saugeen and Nina. It's a total of 26,000 square kilometers. It's a huge area that needs to be managed, and we'll be using Indigenous knowledge systems and science alongside with Western science and knowledge systems through what we call ethical space and two-eyed seeing in the application of governance, management, operations of Saugeen and Nina. There's no reason why we can't replicate that type of a trust creation for Indigenous nations right across the country that are using their territories to fulfill a need in this world that Canada is committed to doing. When we do that, we could stabilize the economic ups and downs in areas that are very hard to create long-term employment. We've done studies here in the Northwest Territories. For every dollar that's invested in Indigenous guardians, there's a savings of up to $3 to the tax base. So this is an investment, not an ongoing cost. So I think we have to look at it from that perspective. And for Saugeen and Nina specifically, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to use the natural resources, the natural climate solutions within Saugeen and Nina to also participate in the carbon offset economies as well, to increase the financial revenues in partnership with the territorial government. Places like Northern Ontario, Northern Quebec, Northern Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia, Yukon, Nunavut. These provinces are going to be asked to make a lot of sacrifices. The potential for carbon offsets and revenues can really help those provincial governments, provincial and territorial governments, to deliver programs and services. That should be considered own source revenues that they can use to pay for education, health, other responsibilities of government. One of my past jobs was as an MLA. The burden on governments to deliver programs and services in a jurisdiction like the Northwest Territories, for an example, is huge. We have a population of 40,000. We're in a very unhospitable environment in terms of temperatures. The cost of infrastructure is huge. But when the world and the country is asking places like the Northwest Territories to protect large swaths of their territories, of their lands, for the benefit of the good of the nation, then we have to recognize that we are also cutting them off from potential revenues from natural or non-renewable resource development, tax base from that, royalties from that. But if we use carbon offsets here in the Northwest Territories, for example, to Indigenous protected and conserved areas, I think there could be a huge revenue stream that can be used for programs and services cost. At the same time, to create a certainty for investment in other areas of opportunities in non-renewable resource development. This will help diversify our economies, stabilize and diversify our economies in the northern parts of the country.
Thank you. You know, it's great to hear from Steven and Jenny on the specific, on the high level, 30,000 feet up, looking at all the different issues related to regulation and what this means globally for the planet and Mother Earth, and some of the specific initiatives that that are happening in those areas, and what could be done, to make this a replicated process, or at least an option for Indigenous nations across our country. That is it for the initial presentations. We're going to get into our Q&A now and bring all of our speakers back to spend the rest of our time together in that way. And I do think all of the questions that have been coming in on the chat, and Joseph and Jamie, who have been working diligently to respond to some of them. There's some great conversations that are happening on the side as we listen to the wisdom from the speakers here on the panel. So for the first question, that is coming up is related to this market now of, we hear a regulated market and a voluntary market. Can somebody from the panel clarify or define what is the regulated market? What is the voluntary market?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that one up. So at the end of the day, we're talking about very much the same projects and very similar processes for developing a carbon offset in a voluntary or a regulated or compliance market. The main difference is the regulatory compliance market will be a provincial or federal program that requires industry to achieve emissions reductions. So there is a federal program. If you're in BC, there's a carbon tax, or if you're in Alberta, there is a provincial program. And when they require industry to achieve reductions, they're also giving them some degree of flexibility to invest in the lowest cost reductions through offsets. And what that achieves is a lower cost of achieving the same climate benefit. And the lower the cost it is, the more we can do. So that's very important. And so when you do an offset according to a protocol that's approved by one of these provincial or federal programs, you develop an offset that one of these industrial regulated entities can use against their compliance obligation. And the really important thing about that is we have a common framework for carbon pricing across Canada now as a result of federal legislation. And that's the carbon levy, the federal carbon levy that's set at it will be $40 in 2021. It's going up to $50 in 2022. And there have been announcements about an intention for it to go up $15 a ton to $170 in 2030. And so offsets in the market are priced at a discount to that carbon levy, traditionally in a 5 to 15% discount. And so that provides really interesting pricing for offsets under these regulated compliance markets, because it's priced off of that federal and provincial carbon pricing that is due to increase over time. Voluntary offsets are offsets you generate using standards that are approved by voluntary registries, reputable voluntary registries. The Voluntary Carbon Standard, VCS, the Climate Action Reserve, American Carbon Registry. These they have protocols that are approved and that have met a lot of, have robust integrity to them. But at the end of the day, they're creating offsets that mostly large corporations will buy to meet net zero and carbon footprint reduction voluntary. Well, so these are typically not your major industrial emitters in Canada who are covered under the regulatory system. So as they're doing it as a voluntary commitment, they're typically, the pricing in that market is less. So a typical forest carbon project, achieves the highest pricing in the voluntary market. At small scale, that can be, fairly interesting, but at any large scale, you're looking at the $10 to $15 per ton range. You're also looking at some different trade-offs in terms of the length of the commitment that you need to make to permanence. In many cases, it's 40 years, whereas in the compliance regime, it's 100. And so there are some differences, but by and large, the difference relates principally to the pricing and who you're selling those offsets to. I'll stop there.
A question for David or Joseph on your specific project in that area. Under the Crown Forest Sustainability Act, what would need to occur from where you're at today to make your project a reality, to start trading offsets?
I think there's a couple of things on the go. We've been poking around with Ministry of Natural Resources a little bit prior to the election that happened, putting a Conservative government in place in Ontario. We've seen some major shifts in commitments out of the new Conservative government, and we continue to nurture a dialogue and relationship in an informal way, both with industry, both with the Crown. And we feel like first we have to sort of prove up the availability that there is a viable project in the commercial industrial landscape, and then match it to what's happening right now, where the voluntary market is starting to create some consternation, and the federal government trying to live up to its commitments of envisioning how Indigenous communities can participate. We want to have the proof of concept in our hands so that we're readiness building at this stage to answer both opportunities. I don't think industry necessarily is going to be a barrier for us, but I do see one of the challenges being, if you want to conserve or change the management regime to grow forest cubic meters longer into time, we probably need to start looking at some land zonation opportunities around intensification, where certain parts of the landscape could be accepted as faster growing forest condition types, but in other circumstances there'd be longer rotations. So not a direct answer, but we've certainly been active in trying to keep apprised of the attitudes and opinions that are out there, but try to be at the front end of predicting where our opportunities lie. We know, for example, in our strategy that we provided to the Anishinaabe Nation executive, there is a need to do a bilateral conversation on atmospheric benefit agreement. And it should favor our northern climate, our northern communities' needs. I mean, the cost of living alone, just to fly goods and services into the north, we're not resource or revenue rich from the resources. In fact, the majority of the extractions benefit shareholders that don't even live in the region. So we don't have a circular economy, and I think we've got enough value proposition in what we're pitching, so that the benefit is seen as needed and can rest with the communities. Somebody had mentioned about knowledge and learning systems in the questions here about how do we take our valued learning systems about land knowledge and have careers around those, instead of all of our people going south to learn in universities and colleges. How do we bring some more of that valued verification or certification of you can have a career, for example, the Guardian program, the National Guardian Network program. I mean, you can have a lot of localized learning and skill set development to engage in forest carbon verification and management. So we're trying to hit it at all levels of creating that value proposition, a good storyboard, making it hard for anyone to say no.
And with Chris, you have an ESFL in the area as a long-term license under the Crown Forest Sustainability Act. What steps need to be taken in your view to move this forward, where you're in a position to offset in either in the forested area or the other project with Lac Seul First Nation?
Well, I think the biggest hurdle that needs to be overcome is the Crown government issue between the local First Nations and whether or not we're participating in the local logging operations or not. In order for the First Nations to take a stewardship role moving forward into how these forests are governed long term for maximum benefit across the planet, but for maximum benefit derived by the local communities, the Crown governments need to recognize that and they need to recognize that the inherent stewardship that we've lived by time immemorial is a fundamental component of the treaty relationship amongst the First Peoples and the colonials. That's the biggest one. The next would be, again, as some of the questions have gone, how are carbon quote unquote taxes and everything like that of benefit to anybody? There needs to be a general understanding at a grassroots right up through the political chambers of a common understanding of what the implications of all of this are and how everybody can derive a long-term permanent, hopefully, benefit. But I guess to sum really quickly, it's right now, it is the Crown. The First Nations have always had that understanding of why we do things the way we do, and the Crown doesn't. Corporations are, founded in essentially the colonial attitude, anyways. So the corporations that are doing the extractions without leaving a common benefit for everybody in the area also have to go through that learning process. And I think those are the two biggest ones. When it comes to engaging communities and engaging experts and engaging the locals, the trappers, the hunters, the fishers, anybody who's coming in as a tourist even, having them weighing in and being felt that they are being heard and received and that their opinion matters is the easier one. It's getting through, the interprovincial fight or the provincial fight with the federal government on whether or not this is even applicable, who gets to apply it, what rules, and that is at the moment the biggest stumbling block. Anyway.
Could I ask Jason that Joseph be given an opportunity just to supplement from our project side? We've had a text exchange, and I did want him to follow up with one other technical piece. Miigwech.
Hi, thanks so much. Thanks, David and Jason. So one of the pieces, and it was partly to the question of what needs to happen at the Crown level, what needs to happen to move these projects forward, from concept through development, through later development, and then bringing them to ground. One of the early-ish pieces of the puzzle is a document called the Project Idea Document, or the Project Idea Note. And it's really sort of a set of questions, I call them the 40,000 foot set of questions. So pretty high level, but it's important because it asks you really all of the questions that you're going to have to answer about your project in order for your project to be able to successfully go through the rest of the hoops of development. And I find it valuable when projects start working on this sort of, as early as possible, and even if they don't have all the answers, to start populating that document. And that helps, know when you've kind of got your stuff solid and where you need to do more work. And then once you have that, it becomes a really valuable tool for showing really anybody who wants to know about the project what the details are from the high level of what you're hoping to do on the landscape and all these things. So when you're going to the Crown, especially if the Crown is sort of savvy around carbon markets and carbon development, or they have a system, the Project Idea Note is kind of one of those tools you can bring to say, we're getting our ducks are in order. This is how things are going to roll out. We need to, for example, be getting this atmospheric benefit sharing agreement from you to be able to move forward on this. And when you can show your level of readiness as much advanced, I feel, in my experience, that has a significant amount of weight and sort of momentum to move the project forward. That's the kind of document that leads into the project design documents, the deeper carbon geekery of how this work counts as a carbon offset. Also importantly, that project idea document can be kind of table stakes when you want to discuss with people who might be financing your project or funding your project. So it allows a clear way to explain how great it is. It also, if you're looking at buyers or people who may invest earlier on in the project to make it move, you're able to show them your chops and why this is a good project. So we're in that stage with the project in Northeast Superior, which is exciting, and having that carbon modeling work that was done with our partners allows us to feed that in and continue to improve the readiness of our project. I did, if I could, want to speak to one of the questions around, why offsets, and should we even be doing this kind of thing? Are these a legitimate tool? Are these a useful tool for Indigenous communities, for people serious about addressing climate change? And as you might imagine, I believe the answer is yes, that these are a very important tool. And one of the ways, that I really conceptualize offsets is they're a tool to bring the future closer to the present. They're a way to be financing and enabling the projects that get or keep carbon out of the atmosphere that we know are going to be critical for our survival as a species and as a planet and as a biosphere. We're moving those from, some future to today. And part of that's really built into the additionality concept of offsets, which is they couldn't happen if it weren't for the barriers overcome by the offset project. Oftentimes that's financial additionality, but there are others as well. So I don't think that anybody would argue that the type of work, or most people on the call would argue that the type of work that Wahkohtowin is doing, that Lac Seul is doing, that Agoke is doing, empowering these communities to drive their priorities on the landscape to get the work done important for their communities, that has a climate benefit and so often has other ecological benefits. And so if we're able to just do these projects right now, I would say great, you don't need carbon offsets. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to move stuff forward so that that's the reality. But today, it's not the reality. And so we need this tool, and it's a powerful tool that connects up into the other aspects, of the zeitgeist, of the spirit of the times, and enables projects like these to move ahead. And kind of my last point I'll lay down about offsets is they're really a democratizing opportunity for people and communities and organizations to engage in the low carbon economy. If you just have a carbon tax or you just have regulation, that generally just falls on the big polluters and on big organizations, on big corporations. They get to hold the chips. In a carbon tax, if the only thing you can do is just reduce as a big polluter, they hold the chips, they hold the responsibility, which is really important, but perversely it sort of excludes other folks. With carbon offsets, that allows us to take the carbon pricing signal where these large polluters have to reduce their emissions in a variety of different fashions, and it allows us to port some of that benefit over onto the landscape, into natural climate solutions, into individual and groups of Indigenous communities who want to do better things on their landscape. So I think it's a very powerful tool. It needs to be used well. It needs to be high quality standards, but we know that we can do that, achieve these outcomes. So I'm all for it. Thanks.
Okay, question around the First Nations that are asserting jurisdiction, taking tenure, and then moving forward with economic reconciliation and being a major player in the forest industry. How there may be misconceptions out there related to setting aside their forest for an additional 15-year rotation or a large area, and how that impacts annual allowable cut wood supply for our First Nation to own operations. Could somebody on the panel discuss any of the trade-offs that are there related to lowering volumes on an annual or in a 10-year FMP forest management plan, and how how that discussion could be pursued at the community level when community members do have an interest in keeping their people active in the forest sector?
I can certainly address one part of that, and I'd say there's a differentiation between that aspect on, let's say, reserve land and on traditional territory that is on a Crown managed forest. On reserve land, there can very much be the coexistence of sustainable forest management and logging operations, as long as that logging is below annual growth, so that the forest is growing over time, and where there is a very real threat that forest would undergo much more intensive harvesting if it is not for the forest carbon project. And so we're working with Indigenous communities where they have offers to come and liquidate all their merchantable timber at $5 a cubic meter, and they will take it if they don't have an alternative. And forest carbon offers that alternative. They're going to continue to log, perhaps, and retain jobs related to logging, but they're going to find a more optimal outcome between those two values. And the forest carbon revenue allows them to do that. It allows them to achieve the same revenue or a greater revenue outcome, and have a better balance of conservation of the landscape. And on traditional territory that involves a Crown managed forest, it is different. It's about being above the provincial regulated standard for forest management. The same economics can exist in terms of the potential benefit in carbon sequestration being higher than the timber revenues you can achieve from logging. But I would say the way to conceive of those projects is it's just going to incentivize meeting a higher standard of sustainable forest management. There may be curtailment of logging, but that curtailment is going to be on the basis of things like extending rotation ages that Joseph talked about, things like reduced impact logging that reduces the impact of that on the landscape. And so you can achieve that same benefit of revenue generation for the community and benefit sharing through a different outcome that in all likelihood involves some degree of less intensive harvesting, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. It's not, oh, in order to generate an offset, I have to forego logging. It's often about optimizing that relationship. Extending rotation ages involves, continuing to log. But it means you're logging at a more optimal time. And so it's not a straightforward consideration, I'll admit, but I encourage people not to think of it as a one-to-one trade-off. This is about incentivizing a higher standard of managing our forest resources.
Okay. Any other comments from anyone else on that question?
Certainly. Thanks, Jason. What I would like to offer is, the Crown Forest Sustainability Act, if you read the words of it, Crown Forest Sustainability Act, it's not a timber act. It's not a timber volume act. It was meant to, in 1994, in Ontario's context, evolve to actually provide for and manage for sustainability. So our goal by participating in tenure reform is actually to be part of that conversation when these forest management plans are developed and the long-term management directions are set, is to actually start to incorporate these changes of what we determine as Indigenous people to infuse that vision of what that change needs to look like. So at any one given time, just as an example, all of the acts across Canada, forest acts, if there is a major occurrence where there's a downward pressure in available wood supply because of fire infestation, something's caused a direct impact on available volume, well, you can't deliver the same volume off less than what's available. So there are opportunities across all legislation to put a downward pressure on available wood supply. So what I'm getting at is there's this discretion. There's community interest. I believe Chris mentioned you were on a local citizens committee. By design in Ontario, those LCCs are supposed to create that localized voice of what needs to happen on the land, to which forestry activities are going to occur. But in Ontario, we understand the LCCs don't necessarily carry the voice that are prescribed, like that should be available, Anyway, I call them pet projects to the district manager. That's what an LCC to me is. I'm talking, going back to the higher level aspects of this, I sincerely believe the more we can actually drive at these PIDs, project idea documents, and actually show and force the contemplation around there is space to do more than one thing. It's not all about managing for timber. There's a reason why we have Species at Risk Act today. You know, what's occurred in the past is not good for us today, right? Where we see the mammal depletion, the ecosystem deterioration. Talk to all the biologists across Canada nationally. There has been a downward degradation in industrialized forests. We need to change that conversation. And this is one of the ways to do that. It's a more holistic look at the forest. And I don't think we're eroding ourselves by having those atmospheric benefit agreement conversations with little brother to the federal government. I call the provinces little brother to the federal government, the Section 92 rights holders. Those are delegated powers, right? They're little brother. We have treaty rights, right? The federal government. And so I think UNDRIP is a tool to be used, and it's all on the table right now, is really the way I see it. And there is a willingness to listen and hear and learn, and industry can be a direct partner in that conversation. And I don't think they're being very fearful. The world is globalized, and the world is watching what we're doing with the boreal forest predominantly, but of course other at-risk ecosystems across the world as well, right? Speaking to the West Coast, you know, speaking to the South, I don't see the existing provincial legislation as being our barrier anymore. I think it's about us standing up and putting our voices out there and getting the job done. Collaboration.
Thank you. Steven, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think this is a great segue into what is Indigenous leadership here. You know, for too many years we've been talking about rights and looking towards Crown governments for solutions. This is about Indigenous solutions and taking the bull by the horn and just doing it. The definition of an Indigenous protected and conserved area, as described by the Indigenous Circle of Experts in our report and recommendations, is that it's an area that's declared as an Indigenous protected or conserved area by Indigenous nations or governments. That's it. You know, that's a declaration. It's not about, hey, can we create this? It's about them declaring it. Now, the challenge right down here, especially around carbon offsets, is the term they use as additionality. If an area is not in the way of development, they don't qualify for additionality, therefore they don't qualify for offsets. However, those are old rules. These are antiquated policies that's driving policy or challenges that we face today. We only have 25% biodiversity left. If the world needs us to protect those biodiversity, then they need to, local states, provincial, territorial, and federal policies should come in line with that ability for Indigenous nations to preserve their territories, and for those of us that choose to support those that leadership. So I think that's the biggest challenge right now for Indigenous protected and conserved areas. Many may not qualify for the additionality status. You're on mute.
Thank you. Question on the business side of things. We talked a lot about regulations. We talked a lot about Crown legislation. We talked about some examples where there's work in play. Can anybody share from a hypothetical situation potential revenue projections, you know, related to being in the carbon offset game, and whether that be from a small First Nation community offsetting a certain amount of you know, square kilometers, or a Crown unit that's moved into First Nation tenure? Does anybody have any idea of what that would look like as far as revenue?
Jenny, maybe
a little. Yeah, sure. Hi. So it's a great question, and I think that you know, starting to move into doing these project idea documents, starting to do the modeling can get you a look at what are sort of the gross tons, the maximum tons of carbon benefit that you can create from undertaking this management change. And then you want to start netting down those volumes based on other concepts like leakage, like permanence. So for example, if you're protecting this amount of forest, but there's still demand for that wood supply, some of that's going to get cut somewhere else. And a lot of times there's 50% leakage. So you have to reduce that from the amount of carbon that you can claim as an offset. There's also permanence buffers. So if you model out conservatively that over 100 years, another half of that forest, for example, or let's say 25, let's say half for easy of that forest is likely to burn down or revert in some other fashion, then you'd have to do another 50% reduction, which total would get you 25% net carbon benefit. And you know, you can make offsets out of that 25% from that 100% that you quantified in terms of what's actually happening just on the landscape. I kind of bring that up to note that depending on the amount of trust you have in the system, it can look strange, it can look, you know, weird and gameable. But my experience and, you know, my cheering of this is really for the great projects. And I think there are less good projects. I think those are naturally getting winnowed out to a certain extent, and we need to keep up pressure on that as well to make sure that it's the best projects moving forward. But there are a lot of tools in place to make sure that what you're crediting as an offset at the end of the day really is an additional emission reduction that wouldn't have happened, and that's permanent for at least 100 years, which is kind of the standard around forest carbon. Then you take that number and you multiply it by the amount that you're able to sell it for. And that's really going to depend into which compliance and voluntary market you're able to sell it, you know, where that price is at the time. Are you able to sell into a compliance market with the kind of offset that you're creating? And then there's also going to be dynamics of volume. So sometimes if somebody's willing to buy all your tons in one go, you'll sell it to them for half the price or 3/4 of the price. You'd sell it in small chunks because it makes sense to sell it all out like that. Other times you can get your top value across your whole portfolio because of how compelling the project is, and generally that there, you know, if there's less competition for sales. We had some discussion in the chat around prices. I think an important thing to recognize is that the federal carbon tax price is going up, and that's really a backstop price for the cost per ton that large polluters will have to pay under the output-based pricing system that's set up. Their sort of intensity-based cap and trade. So it's not guaranteed that carbon offsets will go up to $50 next year or $170 by 2030, but they could, and it really depends on how strict the federal government is, or whatever regulated market is, on reducing the emissions from those organizations. So I think if pressure can be put on Canada to, you know, we really need to reduce these emissions, you allow and you work through the cheaper emission reductions, you can get through to the ones that cost a lot more and have a lot more value and are bringing value to communities as well. So that's a little bit of the dynamic. The prices really do range. I think that part of working with folks who are engaged in this market and engaging yourselves in this market is to try to start hammer out where are we kind of looking here, and then does this allow us to move our project forward based on what we can predict or not. And I always like to see that a project has a couple different pathways of moving forward, because, you know, we are promising people a lot, even just by talking about this or rolling into a community and saying like, hey, we've got this great new tool. And I think it's important to take that responsibility really seriously. And so as you get people involved, as you get community involved in this discussion, laying out the opportunity, but also the barriers so that everybody recognizes that, and then really getting down to work to, you know, hammer out those pathways through the system. And I do like to say that one of the best outcomes of a feasibility assessment or a feasibility study can be to decide that it's not the right project for you and your community for some reason or another, because you want to find that out, you know, in, you know, year 1, month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, rather than in like year 3.5 or year 5 or year 10. Doing that good diligence up front, getting really clear, building capacity in your team is really valuable to make sure you can get out to that really happy moment when you funded your project, you know that you can keep rolling it forward into the future and creating these benefits.
I'll dare to take an actual direct number step into this foray, and don't hold me to the numbers, but because we know the numbers can range, right? But when we've done our analysis right now on these particular forest units, we figured with the different modeling we've proposed to do in the scenario of potential impact on wood supply, because those were the variables we were toying with, we estimated that we could see as high as, you know, $1 million a year for a 20-year stretch in carbon sequestration value. Now, as Joseph said, you got to temper that with permanency and go out and verify that permanency. So when you think about our Guardian program that we were discussing earlier, it's not about our communities in that geography getting like forest carbon sequestration rich. What it's actually doing is creating a new form of economic participation to grow our future leaders and stewards and managers in our lands and resource departments. It's a reinvestment back into our system of governance development. That's our vision. That's what we're thinking about. It's not creating the $500 million trust that our community will then go to outer space on for the 50 years from now. We're seeing it as a near-term tool and trying to get it in front of governments that say, we're ready. There's not a huge impact. Currently, the businesses that operate on our forests, they've never harvested 100% of their allowable harvest volumes for the last decade. So why are we fooling ourselves that we can't change the way we model forests through time and do it differently, do it in an improved way? So there, Joseph, I put some numbers out there. I hope that doesn't scare you too much. And Joseph's he's a little reserved when it comes to throwing numbers out there, but I that's what we've come to learn. Limited impact on wood availability, about $1 million a year over a 20-year period. That's a lot of money when you're talking about our sort of 4, 5, 6 communities directly affected by these forests.
Okay, we've got time for one more comment from Steven before we wrap up here.
All right, I think I'll use Indigenous particular conserved areas or protected areas and permanency. Mckinnon is 26,000 square kilometers. And there's technologies now in businesses. For example, I sent a shapefile of Mckinnon Federal Park Reserve to some folks in the United States who have the technology to be able to take that shapefile and determine the value of the natural nature-based solutions, including carbon sink. So for a protected area of that size, I think that just in that area alone, there's about 15 million metric tons of carbon. That we had sold that, if we were managing that with permanency, so we should be able to sell 100% of that, or 75% of it, or even 50% of that. So you take that number, 15, say 7.7 million, at a voluntary carbon where you sell the carbon offsets in the voluntary market at $7 a metric ton. 7 times 7 is $49 million. So just purely throwing the numbers out, just doing the math of doing the calculation. But as we know, those numbers can be the value of a metric ton of carbon can change and can go up and may go up as through regulatory processes and so on. So that's what I would say. But there's also a new NGO called Nature for Justice, who are working globally to connect remote communities that have carbon offset potential with industry and corporate interests as well. So there's momentum growing around carbon and carbon offsets in the carbon economy globally. And I know there's some folks that are even introducing carbon pricing to the New York Stock Exchange. So it's an emerging reality.
Okay, thank you, Steven, for ending on that note. And I wanted to thank all the other speakers as well for their time today. It's been a really engaging discussion. There's been a lot of information that's been brought out, and you know, a lot more questions that that we could follow up on either by email or in the next session or before then. You know, there's you know, scratching the surface on this. There's so much more to talk about related to you know, how long the timber needs to be left, and what needs to be done moving forward, and how much it costs to manage a carbon program, and so forth, that cap and trade. Like there's just so many other questions that have come up that, you know, these 2 hours have gone by very quickly, but we'll have more opportunity to get into that discussion in the future. So thank you to Joseph, David, Colin, Chris, Jamie, Steven, and Jenny for participating in this kickoff webinar today. I'd also like to thank Metcalf Foundation for their support, and all the partners that collaborated on this event: the Anishinabe Business Professional Association, Ecotrust Canada, Nature United, Bluesource, Ontario Nature, David Suzuki Foundation, and Anwatan. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar as we dive deeper into the Coastal Great Bear Initiative on February 26th from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meanwhile, if you expect this, you will expect to see this webinar posted on the CRP website in the next few days. Thank you, everyone. Miigwech, and have a nice weekend.